Hello everyone, welcome to Asian Pacific shows today. In this episode today we are going to talk about the China and Japan relations. My guest is Professor Stephen Robert Nagy. Professor Stephen has been a senior associate professor at the Department of Political and International Studies at International Christian University since September 2014. Concurrently, he is a senior fellow at the MacDonald Laurier Institute, a research fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, a visiting fellow with the Japan Institute of International Affairs. He was selected as a distinguished fellow for the Asia Pacific Foundation from 2017 to 2020. He serves as the director of the policy studies for the Yokosuka Council of Asia Pacific Studies, spearheading the Indo-Pacific Policy Dialogue Series and as a governor of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Japan. His recent founded research projects are Sino-Japanese relations in the wake of the 2012 territorial disputes, investigating changes in Japanese business, trade, and investment strategy in China, perceptions and drivers of Chinese view on Japanese and U.S. foreign policy in the region. He's currently working on the middle power approach to geopower competition in the Pacific region. His consulting work related to the Indo-Pacific includes projects on CPTPP membership and expansion on the line extremism in Japan, Sino-Japanese political-economic relations, and the U.S., Japan, and China relations. Welcome, Stephen. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Lokman. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Professor Stephen, our topic is quite important. That is two big country and extremely important country in East Asia. One of the China and other of is Japan. I would like to ask, how can we understand the current state of Japan and China relations?
Well, I would use three words: contradiction, coexistence, and rival. And I use those three words, I think, very explicitly. The contradiction is that these two countries share many cultural features. They have a long history. Of course, Japan has deeply inherited many cultural features from China. But at the same time, they have very different views about politics, about what kinds of political systems they want, and the future of the region. The second word I used was coexistence. These two countries must coexist. They have to work together, and they need to find ways to collaborate and leverage their comparative advantages. And they've done a fairly good job since the 1970s. But this relationship has become more problematic. The last word I used is competition. And here, I think that these two countries are competing with each other for how they understand the region to move and evolve moving forward. I think China understands the region moving forward through the Belt Road Initiative, through non-binding, non-legalistic interpretations of relationships, through a high priority of sovereignty and non-interference is articulated through the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. Whereas Japan is focused on an idea called the free and open Indo-Pacific, which focuses on transparency, focuses on rules-based order, focuses on development, infrastructure, connectivity, and contributing to shaping institutions in the Indo-Pacific region such that they are rules-based. It's these three words that I understand the bilateral relations on, but I think that there's many aspects that we can discuss moving forward tonight.
Professor Stephen, with the Kishida successful election in October, what do you see is the trajectory of the China and Japan relations?
So this is an excellent question, Lokman. Thank you. So I think what we need to look at Sino-Japanese relations from a longer-term perspective. Beginning in the 1970s, the relationships were normalized. Both states decided to put the war behind them. We saw our Chinese friends issuing apologies for Japan's wartime past, and the Japanese deciding to invest a huge amount of ODA, that's overseas development assistance, and eventually outside the intergovernmental loan system and donation system to China, Japanese businesses decided to invest what we call foreign direct investment in China. And really, from the mid to late 70s up until the 2000s, we saw a huge influx of OD and FDI, which contributed to building the production network that exists in China today. And that has been the key to the relationships. And sometimes we articulate the relationship as using a word called sekkei bunri, which basically means the separation of politics and economics, or cold politics and hot economics. Now, beginning in the 2000s, and of course, with the ascent of Secretary General Xi Jinping into power in 2012, the relationship has become more complex. China has gone from a small economy to the second largest economy in the world. It surpassed the Japanese economy in 2011 as being the biggest economy in the region, only second to China or to the United States. And today, both countries are competing for influence throughout the region, whether it's Southeast Asia or South Asia. And we see that through the BRI, the Belt Road Initiative, as well as through the Free and Open Indo-Pacific. So in that sense, we've seen the relationship continue to deepen, continue to grow through economic means, but the relationship has become more complicated in the areas of security and politics. Under Kishida Fumio, the current Prime Minister of Japan, I think that he's going to inherit and continue much of the policies that were forged under the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And the reason is Prime Minister Shinzo Abe understood that Japan's prosperity and its future relationship with China would be very much related to embedding Japan into the Indo-Pacific region, being one of the countries that are contributing to institution building throughout the region, but also through investing in multilateralism. And we've seen Japan really take a very omnidirectional form of multilateralism. We see it led the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which excludes China at this stage, but it also joined the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which includes China. We see that Japan signed the Japan-EU Economic Partnership Agreement in 2017, and following that, the Japan-EU Infrastructure and Connectivity Agreement, really embedding Japan into a system of multilateral relationships that are supposed to strengthen its position globally, make it a trading leader, but importantly, give it more gravitas, give it more weight in the international trading system, with the hope that this will pull China in a different direction. And this Prime Minister Kishida has very much inherited this strategy, and they will continue this strategy by doubling down on this idea of free and open Indo-Pacific, working with like-minded countries, also finding opportunities to continue to deepen trade and economic relationships with China based on conditions which include transparency, fiscal sustainability, lack of geopolitical intentions, and really, from the Japan's point of view, is to think about building prosperous economic relationships based on transparent rules-based system. In my view, I think Kishida is going to continue down this path. The question is, which partners will join Japan in this idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific? And I think for some of your viewers, you may be thinking, this sounds very exclusive. Is Japan excluding China? No, I don't think so. Again, we see Japan reaching out with Beijing on infrastructure projects in third countries. So when Prime Minister Abe visited China in 2019, there was an agreement to engage in third country infrastructure building with China based on 4 conditions. And at this stage, there was before COVID about 55 projects going on. As I mentioned, Japan is engaging in trade relations through the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and there's talk about China potentially joining the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, and potentially a trilateral free trade agreement between China, South Korea, and Japan. So Japan's approach is certainly not a zero-sum agreement. Prime Minister Kishida and the government in Japan have concerns about China, but at the same time, they understand that it's a neighbor that they need to live with, work with, and build a productive relationship with.
Uh, Stephen, PM Kishida and Foreign Minister Hayashi are often painted as a China doves. What is your views on these approaches?
So I think that this is slightly a misinterpretation or a misreading of both of these prominent politicians' views. So Prime Minister Abe used to be, or Prime Minister Kishida used to be the foreign minister under Prime Minister Abe. Actually, he was the longest-serving foreign minister in many generations. And during that time, he signed the Comfort Women Agreement with the South Koreans. He forged a relatively positive relationship with China. And he was seen as somebody that would listen. And that's really important when we're talking about international affairs, is listening to each other's concerns and trying to find walkways or crosswalks to build better relations. So in that sense, I see Prime Minister Abe, Prime Minister Kishida, not as a dove, but somebody that listens and tries to find non-confrontational ways to deal with challenges in the relationship. Now, Foreign Minister Hayashi is a little bit different. He heads the Parliamentary Committee for Japan-China Friendship Relations. And in that context, he is seen as being having connections with China, promoting the bilateral relations, and thinking about how to, again, coexist through building mutual understanding and mutual beneficial relationships. So I think if you only look at that aspect of Foreign Minister Hayashi's background, you may tend to think of him as a China dove. But in reality, Foreign Minister Hayashi, when he was young, he served with U.S. congressmen. He spent a significant amount of time in the United States. Really, I think that when we're thinking about Foreign Minister Hayashi and his inclinations toward China or the United States, it's much more difficult to build transparent and open relationships with Chinese counterparts compared to the United States. And this is not a denigration of China. It's just, I think the values, political values, diplomatic values, and security priorities are a mismatch. There's a lot more overlap and converging of security interests between the United States and China, or United States and Japan. And as a result, they have many more things to talk about and many more areas of cooperation. And that's seen in various aspects of Japan-U.S. relations, whether it's the alliance, whether it's the mini trade deal that was signed under the former administration in the United States, or moving forward on other kinds of agreements. With the China-Japan relationship, of course, both Hayashi and Kishida understand the economic importance of that relationship. And so do Japanese people. If you look at the recent Genron poll, despite record highs of unfavorable ratings of China in Japan, if you ask the question of is China an important partner in the region, ordinary Japanese citizens, as well as elite, say, of course. More than 70% say that China is a critical partner within the region. So it's a very nuanced view, and I think the nuanced view of the public is shared by Hayashi and Kishida in terms of thinking about the most important bilateral relationship in the region.
Let me ask about the previous administrations. How do you understand Japan's approach to the China or several administrations from Abe's or previous until now, until Kishida?
So I do think that what we've seen is what we call a non-zero-sum approach to bilateral relations, that Japan understands very clearly that its economic prosperity is linked to engaging in economic intercourse with China. And let me just give you some figures. In 2020, the trading relationship between Japan and China led to about 210 billion US dollars in exports to China from Japan. And that includes mainland China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. It's about 36% of Japan's total exports, which is really significant. And it suggests that Japan and China have very strong economic relations, and those strong economic relations inform the decisions of policymakers. That has been true 30 years ago. It's been true 20 years ago, 10 years ago, today, and likely it will be the same in 10 years or 20 years from today. The burgeoning middle class in China, which today is about 300 or 400 million, loves Japanese products. They feel they're safe, high tech, they're artisan, and as a result, they're sought after in the Chinese context. So when we're drilling down into this a little bit more, Lokman, I think one of the changes, though, that the Japanese have seen or now understand began really in 2001 when China joined the WTO. China's economy rapidly grew. It grew so much that again it surpassed the Japanese economy in 2011. And what we've seen since then is the systems of governance, the systems of trade have become increasingly filled with contradictions, resulting in an increasingly challenged economic relationship with China, and not just with Japan, but many countries. And today, really beginning back in 2010 and stretching up today, we've seen investment in something what we call economic security in the Japanese context. What that basically means is to find some strategies to direct investment away from China. That doesn't mean direct all investment away from China. What it means is to direct some investment away from China to Southeast Asia and South Asia, so that Japan has a better economic portfolio, more diversified throughout the region. Now, why is it doing this? Part of it is driven by cost. The cost of doing business in China has increased substantially over the past 21 years or 25 years. And as a result, the profitability of doing business in China has changed. Geopolitics has become more problematic. In 2010, there was a rare earth embargo against Japan, and this pushed Japan to try and find other markets for rare earth materials. In 2012, when Japan nationalized the Senkaku Islands, of course, there was problems between Japan and China then with riots and vandalism against Japanese businesses in the mainland. And this was a shock to Japanese, and they started to rethink what kind of footprint do they need in China? How can they protect their businesses and investments in China? And what is the general trajectory? And with the recent span of economic coercion against Australian friends, Korean friends, Norwegian friends, Canada, and others, Japan is trying to really balance its economic relationship with China but also try to create some or insulate itself from geopolitics associated with China. And what that means is selective diversification of supply chains. So the tech front, medical equipment, and a few other sensitive areas will probably be reshored in some capacity or diverted to Southeast Asia and South Asia. We see Japan trying to build up Southeast Asia and South Asia to be alternative economic hubs, as well as future production networks. And the idea here is, again, over the long term, to try and recalibrate the economic engagement with China so that Japan can engage from a position of strength, but also engage from a position of economic security. And this is going to be increasingly the direction that Kishida's government will take, but also succeeding governments as well.
Sven, much has been discussed about the economic security, supply chain resilience. What is your understanding of this in the context of the bilateral relations of both countries?
So this is a really important question. I think when we're thinking about how Japan is trying to recalibrate its relationship with China, I want to reemphasize my point that Japan and the Japanese Business Federation, known as the Keidanren, wants to continue to be engaged in the Chinese market. There's too much profit to step back from the market. There's too many benefits associated with the logistics there, the cost of doing business, and the market. Again, there's about 400 million middle-class consumers in China now, and they want to buy products from Japan. So Japan is trying to find ways to diversify and expand its trading partners. So the Comprehensive, Progressive, Trans-Pacific Partnership is one good example of that. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is another good example of that. And I mentioned the mini trade deal between the United States and Japan that was signed in September 2019, and those agreements with European countries. So these are all meant to diversify Japan's trading portfolio, to be a leader in terms of trade rules. And the trade rules that it would like to shape are the trade rules associated with intellectual property rights protection, environmental law, labor law, and limiting the role of state-owned enterprises. And if you dig down into the chapters of the Comprehensive, Progressive, Trans-Pacific Partnership, you see that these are the key distinguishing features of the TPP-11, in that it really wants to protect the next generation of innovators, to support research and development, and to ensure that intellectual property rights are protected so that entrepreneurs, whether it's like you, Lokman, or myself, or others, are willing to invest in research and development to build the next technologies that will shape the region. So trade is a really important pillar in terms of how Japan is thinking about China. It's thinking about it in an inclusive manner, but it's also thinking about the relationship in an exclusive manner, in which Japan is working with like-minded countries to try and shape the region through these strong norms about intellectual property rights, limiting the role of state-owned enterprises, labor law, environmental law. In terms of resilient supply chains, I think the COVID-19 pandemic has really driven home the importance of diversifying supply chains. And you keep hearing me say diversify rather than decouple. So diversify means diversify within China, but also diversify away from China. And here, the explanation is quite simple. There may be another COVID-19 pandemic. There may be another kind of non-traditional security issue, whether it's a typhoon or an earthquake or otherwise. And if it's centered in China, it will dramatically disrupt those global production networks, the supply chains that we depend on for everything from our phones to our computers to our health equipment. So industrial leaders and the Japanese government understand that it's important not only to diversify in China, but away from China. And let me just illustrate an example. So when the COVID-19 pandemic started, we think it started in Wuhan. That Wuhan is a center of car manufacturing and pharmaceutical manufacturing. And when the Chinese government decided to shut down the city, of course, all those supply chains stopped. And the thinking here in Tokyo, and I think in other capitals, is that, well, if there was a fairer distribution or a broader distribution of those capabilities throughout China and throughout the region, that we may not have seen such a problem in supply chains getting out healthcare equipment or cars or whatever the items were being produced in Wuhan at the time. So the idea behind building resilient supply chains, again, is to deal with the next pandemic or the next non-traditional security challenge, but also concerns about geopolitical issues. And I mentioned that economic coercion that I was talking about, whether it's the South Koreans or otherwise. There's growing concern about how supply chains can be weaponized or disrupted to pressure Japan and other countries within the region. And as a result, resilient supply chain initiatives that are being spearheaded by Japan, working with Australia and India, but also working within the Quad context, are meant to start to diversify selectively some of the supply chains and redirect them into South Asia and Southeast Asia, hoping that over decades to come, we'll have a better balance in terms of supply chains and how they fit within the region's economic integration.
Sven, there is, I think, a few questions. What's your understanding of the new capitalism advocated by Kishida?
All right, Andrea, thank you. Where are you from, Andrea? Just if you can type it in, that would be great.
Uh, Not clear, I think,
That's
because
all
I
right.
can,
Um,
yes, I can see the
so this is
question.
a new term that Prime Minister Kishida has brought up, new capitalism. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, like in many countries, I think that there's a strong sense that um, some people did much worse or much better than others. Under the former Prime Minister Abe's Abenomics, we did see inequality increase in Japan. We did see corporations start to become more profitable in Japan, and we did see the average person stagnate or not make the same kinds of gains as uh, the uh, large corporations. So I think Prime Minister Kishida understands that growing inequality is a challenge for Japan, but I think they look at not just what's happening in Japan, they look at what's happening in the United States or in other countries where there's a huge gap between rich and poor, and they see the instability that comes with it. And they see how this can create political divisions, and it can create, it can cause the cohesion of a country to erode and dilute away. So in this sense, Kishida would like to find ways to ensure that wages increase regularly, that taxation schemes don't penalize families and middle-class workers, that the corporate profits that are being made through, for example, the monetization of our data through Facebook or Google or even this system, um, trickle down to the ordinary Tanaka or Suzuki. So in that sense, it is a kind of distributive policy that will hopefully raise the average quality of life for ordinary Japanese. With that being said, I think that there's a huge amount of continuity between new capitalism advocated by Kishida and the capitalism that was advocated by Prime Minister Suga, the former Prime Minister, or Prime Minister Abe. There seems to be a clear understanding that if Japan doesn't champion growth, it doesn't champion innovativeness, if it doesn't champion a little bit more risk, that its economy won't be able to weather the coming storms as economic instability becomes more um, prevalent. Last, I would add that there's a strong understanding that new capitalism is about finding ways to um, ensure that the tools that uh, increase the quality of life, that bring stability to society, that allow for more cohesion, are being implemented in society. And with that, the government is supporting employment programs, training programs, diversity programs, um, social welfare programs so that men and women could put their kids in nursery schools so that they can go to work. And they're also promoting better work-life balance and trying to digitize the economy and change the culture of working all day and all night towards a better life balance that allows for families and creates a more balanced capitalism.
Okay, next question, Jessica Kim. Some suggest that Kishida's call for a departure from neoliberalism is meant to distance himself from the EU governance policies.
Thank you very much, Jessica. So this is another question that's very much related to the previous question. So in many ways, Prime Minister Kishida has said very openly that he would like to advocate for new capitalism. He's criticized the so-called neoliberal policies of not only the Abe administration, but arguably of the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, for the past 20 years. You know, these policies were championed by former Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi. He advocated for privatizing the post office and for a more neoliberal approach to the economy. And here again, his view was that we got to get the economy growing, and if the economy is growing, that will trickle down to ordinary citizens. Well, that wasn't the case. So is Kishida departing from neoliberalism? No. I think that Kishida is trying to make a softer, more friendly neoliberal market that protects the interests of many citizens and ensures that citizens can have families. And when societies don't have families, they can't grow their economy. They lose dignity in their relations, and it creates social instability. As Japan continues to struggle with demographic challenges without increasing the prosperity of ordinary citizens, that means wage growth and quality of life or work-life balance. The demographic challenges will also continue to be a very serious downward force on the Japanese economy.
Okay, now another question, Stefan. Japan is notorious for slow decision making in any crisis, but has the pandemic changed this? And how will this help Japan in managing Chinese relations?
So, David, thank you very much for your question. I think it's a great question. Has it slowed the decision-making process? I think the recent decision to close borders so quickly is really illustrative that Prime Minister Kishida has learned the lessons of Prime Minister Suga and Prime Minister Abe in terms of their very slow response to um, closing the borders and making decisive decisions about the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, you may disagree with the border closure, but my point is that they have made a quick decision to stop the inflow of non-Japanese or non-residents into Japan, to stop the flow of Omicron into the country. Whether it will be 100% successful or not, I'm not sure. But I think this quick decision illustrates that the government can make quick decisions on a particular issue. I don't see this changing broadly. And this is because of leadership, it's because of culture, and I think it's because of the kinds of institutions they have. Moving forward, I think that after the upper house election in the summer of 2020, if Prime Minister Kishida is reelected with a majority, then I assume that he'll be in a better position to make more decisive decisions about economics, about the digital economy, and about economic security, and of course, Sino-Japanese relations. Now, your second question is: will slow decision making does it help or hinder Japan-China relations? Well, when we think about this important bilateral relation, I think we need to be quite clairvoyant that the relationship is not only decades long, but the relationship between modern Japan and modern China is at least 150 years long. And these two countries invested in each other, they've learned from each other, and they've had a huge amount of exchange with each other. They know each other well. And when they make decisions vis-a-vis each other, they don't necessarily do it on the public stage. In many cases, they communicate party to party or through backdoor diplomacy to deal with some of the more difficult challenges in the relationship. And this backdoor diplomacy or this party-to-party diplomacy really doesn't lend itself to quick decision-making. It lends itself to looking at the comprehensive relationship and finding ways to nudge it forward. Increasingly, I think that Japan was going to need to be more decisive in its relationship with China. And I think the most recent explicit statement by Prime Minister Abe about Taiwan being an important part of Japan's security is evidence of that. But remember, he's not the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Kishida is the Prime Minister. And until Prime Minister Kishida is making those decisive decisions, then I think at this stage, it's really a mixed bag when we think about Japan's decision-making process and how it affects Japan-China relations.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I think there is no more question. We have almost out of time, I think. Thank you very much for interview, for this opportunity, Stephen.
Thank you very much. It's a great opportunity to talk about Japan-China relations, and it's a great opportunity to share ideas with you, Lokman. And I really like your program. It's informative, and it's a great opportunity for us to communicate about complex issues to your community and throughout the region. So thank you very much.
You are welcome. Thank you very much. Also, thank you very much for my audiences and those who are asked questions. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel for next shows.